Hey guys, so the holder for my phone isn't working right now, so I'm just sort of holding it myself. I'm gonna do another vlog. I reached out on Twitter to ask people what they wanted me to talk about, and one of the subjects that sort of resonated with me was what are tips for dating with mental illness. And I'm going to sort of take it from the approach of if you're dating someone with a mental illness of some kind. In the grand scheme of things, I think the difficulties tend to go both ways. It should sort of be self evident that dating someone with a mental illness is going to be difficult, but that doesn't mean that the difficulty inhibits the ability to enjoy the relationship on the terms of any sort of relationship. There's no reason that you can't still have a healthy, loving, fulfilling relationship with someone just because they have some measure of mental illness, whether it's social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, Asperger's, any kind of mental illness. I think one of the biggest things that a person needs to do first is to educate themselves about their partner's mental illness, whatever it may be, in much the same way that someone with a mental illness would need to educate themselves, whether they're just getting the diagnosis or whether it's something that they've been struggling with their whole lives. I mean, Lord knows I've been dealing with my anxiety since I was 13 years old, and it's always been a daily battle, but it's also something that I'm continually sort of educating myself about to try to learn how to cope and to deal with the problems that I'm facing sometimes, so that I can have a social life, that I can have a romantic life if that's something that I choose to have or someone chooses to have with me. Ultimately, I think the big thing about education that's going to do is sort of alleviate your concerns about whether or not you're able to really help the person. Because I think in a lot of situations where someone is in a relationship with someone with a mental illness, the immediate inclination is to want to try to fix the person. It's not something that I think people necessarily do consciously, because I think it's kind of offensive to imply that someone needs to be fixed. But I think it's something that people want to do for their partner because naturally, it's what you would want to do for yourself. If there's an aspect of your life that makes your life harder, are you not going to want to, do something to help solve it? So it's only natural, whether you're consciously doing it or not, to want to try to help make your partner's life easier. But the issue is that you can't be a nurse or a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist. You can't be a one person rehab center for another human being. Relationships are about give and take, and in the grand scheme of things, the typical rules for a relationship should still apply. There should be some sort of equality in the amount of give and take in a relationship, even with someone with a mental illness. It's going to be hard for a relationship to reach that level of mutual effort, but if you really care about each other, this should be something that you would want to do. So understand what it is that your partner is going through, but also understand what their normal is, because everybody who's suffering from a mental illness has some measure of normalcy that is their normal. If you have an anxiety disorder, you're probably not going to want to go to the clubs. You're probably not going to want to go to densely populated areas. Maybe a night for you, your normal is staying in and watching Netflix or watching Hulu, or, doing something that requires brain power, like working with your hands or wrenching on your car. And that might not be thrilling for the other person in the relationship, but I mean, that's something that the other person has to decide before really getting serious with this person. Is, do I want to commit that level? Do I essentially want to change what I want out of a relationship for this person? And that kind of goes both ways, in mental illness of, if I have social anxiety, do I want to at least try for the sake of my partner to, put myself out there more? My anxiety is such that I was almost kind of a shut-in for a while, in the sense that I wasn't seeing anybody. I didn't want to go anywhere, and that essentially makes you undateable to some people. So I was kind of forcing myself to get out of my shell. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be good advice for everybody, because there are some things that you really can't force. You need to be able to meet life with this condition on your own terms and not on anybody else's. But I think there is a certain amount of effort that you should at least try to put in, to try to make compromises, because that's what relationships are. They're all compromise. So, I mean, maybe if you can't go to the club, you can go somewhere else. You can go out to dinner somewhere, maybe. And now I'm speaking about anxiety because that's what I know. But there are any number of mental illnesses that people struggle with every day, but they still manage to have functioning relationships because they have partners who understand what their condition is, understand what their triggers are, which is really important, is understanding the triggers, so that you're not, unconsciously adding to their struggle, but also understanding that the parameters of a regular relationship still apply. I mean, like, just because I have anxiety, that doesn't mean I get to treat you like garbage, or be a jerk. That's not an excuse. And if the person is using their mental illness as an excuse, it's kind of a red flag. It shouldn't be a crutch that someone uses for sympathy or to get out of doing the work of making a relationship work. It's give and take. It's equality. It's wanting to see the other person happy, but also wanting to be happy yourself. I mean, you shouldn't sacrifice your own happiness, but it's compromise. It's trying to figure out what works. It's trial and error. In some situations, it might be beneficial to consult a therapist on how best to actually interact with someone with a mental illness, depending on the nature of their mental illness and the severity of that mental illness, and how much you want to be with this person. Because for as great a resource of information as the internet is, this is beyond the pay grade of how did I forget how to talk? It's beyond the pay grade of WebMD in a lot of cases. So, also have a plan in place of maybe, these are activities we can do. Make sure not to use triggering phrases like, well, did you take your medicine today? Which I know that's such a silly thing to say, but that was always something that I had to struggle with growing up. Of, if I had a moment of emotional turmoil, my mother would always ask if I took my medicine today, and I had, but all that would do is kind of send me flying off the handle as a teenager, because you're already dealing with the hormones, and then all of a sudden you feel like the person doesn't trust you to be able to actually keep up with your medication. And the thing with medication is that it's not an instant fix. So just because a person is on medication doesn't mean that they're not going to still have those moments of emotional turmoil, a person with a mental illness is still a person, they're still bound by the same impulses as anybody else, regardless of their mental health or mental condition. So I'm going to wrap this up by just saying that it is beneficial to keep the lines of communication open at all times, so that your partner feels that they're able to safely communicate to you what their issues are and what they're going through without fear of judgment. And, if you're the one who's suffering from mental illness, don't be with anyone who you don't feel you can trust to tell these things to. Because working through a relationship, even without mental illness, has to be about keeping lines of communication and trust open. But it's even more so if you're dealing with a mental illness, because you need to be able to talk to a person without fear of judgment, or fear that they're going to try to, do some thing that is going to make the situation worse. And the only way that they're going to know whether what they do will make the situation worse is if you talk to them. You got to always talk to them. You got to talk to each other. But ultimately, you have to find someone who is understanding and who is willing to be a partner and who's willing to always have your back. But by the same token, if you're dating someone with a mental illness, don't let them treat you badly and then use the mental illness as a crutch, because I've seen that happen to a lot of people. But by the same token, if you have a mental illness, don't let them treat you like you're less than just because you have a mental illness. Yes, there should be empathy in the relationship, but and understanding, or at least the attempt of understanding, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard work. And yet, if the other person is worth it, then you'll be better off for it. So just understand the condition and don't always take it personally if the other person has an outburst, or if they have difficulty communicating to you what's wrong. It's not that they want to withhold, it's just that sometimes the words don't come the way we want them to, or when we want them to. But I just feel like I have to keep reiterating of, don't let a person treat you badly. And this is true of any relationship. There's only so much that a person should be asked to endure in any sort of relationship. But again, it's all up to you and whether you think the other person is worth the effort. And if they are, then, God bless you. But anyway, I hope this helped. And I mean, I'm not a doctor or any sort of licensed professional to be giving advice like this. So take it with a grain of salt. But these are just sort of my opinions and from my experiences of being someone suffering with anxiety for the majority of his life, and how I've dealt with it and have been able to sort of have a dating life. I mean, it's kind of crazy that I've been able to push myself more and more to the point where I can now go on road trips by myself, which was inconceivable even 10 years ago, but ultimately, I think it's all about finding what your normal is and what their normal is and what your normal can be together. So anyway, I'm Nick, and I hope you got something out of this vlog, and if not, I don't know. Have a good week, everyone.